Just quick recap then from last week. So I'm Robert. I'm the head of marketing here at SolarWinds. And I just wanted to reinforce why we're offering this course and courses similar to it, and having guys like Dave, who's external to our organization, come in and speak. And it's really a commitment on our end to the partnership that we have with you guys, and this idea that we have aligned incentives, that we know that as you grow, we grow. And so we are very incented just to help you guys as you're making your transitions into fully managed services and growing your business. And what's great about that is we have Luis Geraldo on, and Dave will get a little bit more of an introduction to him today. And Luis has been around the space for a long, long time, has been a successful MSP himself. He's going to talk today about packaging and pricing, but we might be able to loop him back in later in the course to talk about an exciting initiative we have around a new marketing platform that we're piloting to help our partners grow their businesses. So anyway, excited about today. Dave, let me pass it over to you.
Sounds great. Thanks, Rob. Let's see. There we go. Oh. Yeah, so just a reintroduction of myself. My name's Dave Wilkerson. I am a consultant. I don't work for SolarWinds, but I work with MSPs around the country and in Canada and the UK as well on their businesses. So operational consulting, work on their financials and so forth. So that's kind of my bio. Louise, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, and you can also play us a tune if you'd like.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, I keep laughing at that we keep forgetting to put the number in there. It keeps changing, by the way. But yeah, I've had an MSP for the last 14 years. I started in 2006, beginning to residential IT and sort of making the transition slowly and sometimes painfully into business-focused IT, and in some cases trying to convert some of my old school break-fix business customers into managed services customers. So I might have an opinion or two about whether that process can be successful or not. And for the last 3 years, I was also in the product side of things. I built my own documentation platform in 2013, which got acquired by IT Glue in 2017. I went to work for IT Glue for 3 years, leaving earlier this year. And yeah, recently joined the SolarWinds team to sort of spearhead this interesting marketing platform for partners, which I hope to speak a little bit in more detail about later. But yeah, that's the fun fact about me is that I am originally from Colombia. I used to tour with pop star Shakira playing keyboards back in 1996. So now that you won't be able to think about anything else for the rest of the session, I'll hand it back over to Dave.
Thanks, Louise. I still am waiting for the music, though. I keep hoping that one of these times you'll play there.
It might surprise you one day.
Yeah. So just a reminder, this isn't a webinar. I don't want to just yammer on this whole time and talk. We'd love you to turn your camera on so I can see you. Obviously mute to cut the background noise, but feel free to unmute. And let's talk and ask questions and discuss the things that we're talking about. So you don't want to just listen to me talk. And of course, we'll have Louise for discussion purposes as well, and also comic relief. So we're good there. And again, it is recorded, so you'll have a copy of that. Again, just a reminder, so last week we covered, why to offer managed services versus break fix, what are some of the challenges, pitfalls, and so forth. That recording is available for you. This week, we're going to be going over packaging and pricing of the managed services offerings. Next week, we're going to do staffing and operations for MSP delivery. And then last week, we're going to go over metrics, sales and marketing, QBRs, and driving efficiency. So we've got a lot planned here. So today's objectives, we're going to talk about what types of product you should offer, whether you should offer fully managed or some sort of an a la carte offering, what are the pros and cons of each, products and services that you would want to include in our plans, in the plans that you offer, how you should price and also how you should kind of go to market. That's going to be kind of an abbreviated conversation, because that's something we could probably do a whole 4-week session on in and of itself. So, but we are going to touch on that. So the first decision, and I kind of broke this down into decisions. Your first decision is what type of product should you offer? And the spoiler alert is it really has a lot to do with the kinds of clients you have already and the kinds of clients that are in your market. So let's talk about some of the common products that are out there. The big one, the one that I talk a lot about, is the ACE type product, the all-you-can-eat type product. So that's going to include proactive support, reactive support, monitoring, managed security, and typically is going to cover the entire environment. So workstation, servers, network devices, cloud, all of those things. Some other pretty common kind of flavors are managed core, which is proactive and reactive support of just the servers in the network. So typically you're not going to support workstations, and you're also going to manage security on those devices. So on the servers and as far as network devices, you're going to back up the configs and so forth. You're only typically in that environment going to deal with their own IT. So usually they have somebody that's in charge of IT, even if it's somebody part-time, and that's kind of your liaison that you're working with, or maybe the owner of the company, and in which case that makes it a bit more challenging. Managed security, that's where you're only offering endpoint detection response, so EDR or AV type of a solution, patch management, firewall management, email filtering, backup, those sorts of things. Help desk for employees, that's going to be sort of the opposite of managed core. So that's a situation where the client manages their core and you're helping with the tier 1 help desk support for users. So you're going to help with all of the kind of day-to-day stuff like password resets. I can't get my email. I can't send an email. Whether or not the machine's patched, those kinds of things. So that's kind of that core. And then you escalate back to the client for things that maybe are outside that scope. And then co-managed is kind of a blend of managed core and help desk, where you are you're including a lot of the facets of managed core, but the client is the first line of response when their users call them. So that's called co-manage, and you typically deal with those escalations that come off of that, and then management of the core typically. By the way, anybody have any thoughts or questions about that? ACE, all you can eat. Somebody put in the comment there, Andre. All you can eat. So that's the most typical kind of managed plan that you see out there. We'll talk a lot about that. There's a couple of niche products that we run into a lot. Managed print, which is going to be, you're going to manage just the printers and toners, consumables, those sorts of things. And then what I call advanced managed security, MSSP, so managed security service provider. A lot of people call themselves that and maybe aren't really providing what I would consider advanced managed security, but that's going to be the full SOC, where you're doing threat assessment, SIEM management. You've got a lot of people on staff that are specialized in security, and you're really focused on the regulatory side of things for companies and so forth. These two offerings, while managed print specifically seems maybe like it's not too difficult, it really does require quite a bit more operational maturity than the average, especially young MSP has and can bring to bear, because these are really complicated. Managed print is a very commoditized product. You're going up against companies that maybe sell printers or copiers and have been doing this for 30 years. So it really requires that operational maturity if you really want to make money doing this. And advanced managed security really requires a lot of investment in facilities and people and so forth. Any questions there, comments, discussion? Is managed print included in SolarWinds RMM? I don't think any, and I hate to talk to their products, but generally, I don't think that any of those products really rise to the full level of what you would need to offer to really truly be managed print. You know, you can monitor page counts and those kinds of things, and potentially toner replacement, but it's a very specialized niche kind of an offering. If you have any friends that own a copier company and you talk to them about what's involved in that, you'll find that it's very specialized. I've worked with a couple of companies that do that, and then they added managed services. And what we found was even their software, we couldn't get their software to translate. So they had to kind of run two pieces of software, one for the managed print side of things, and then one for the managed services, the traditional our IT services side of the house. Okay. So where do those products kind of fit in the market? And this is where you kind of get into, who your clients are, where you're going to market with them, and so forth. So SMB, which in this diagram is kind of 1 to 99. If you notice, I have that line bumped up a little bit because, I think it's more like, I think the cutoff for these, what I'm calling SMB focused products, are more like 150 seats, maybe even up to 200 seats. The sweet spot is going to be the all-you-can-eat type products, the managed security products, and managed print products. And remember, that's basic managed security. So patching, antivirus, email, those kinds of things. When you get above that and you get into the mid-market, which is that say 100 to 1,000 seats, the sweet spot is typically that managed core, because when you get into that market, you find more companies that have IT shops. So managed core and advanced managed security for companies that have a lot of regulatory requirements. So if they're banking, credit unions, insurance, those kinds of companies, medical even, they have some more specialized security requirements. And then as you get into this the upper mid-market and even the larger mid-market companies, you'll find that the sweet spot for products is going to be help desk only. So they've got an IT group, and you can sort of offload some of their load by taking that kind of tier 1 work off their plates in a help desk only product. Co-managed, where you're working together with their IT team to manage their infrastructure. And then again, that advanced managed security type of a product. And then once you get into enterprise, that's really generally where we at our size kind of fall off. And you get companies like HP and IBM and so forth, and their managed services products kind of come into play. We don't see too many clients in that size for the typical managed service providers that are likely to be certainly on this call, and even the ones that I work with. So that's kind of how this all lays out in terms of products and your market that you're dealing with. So I'm going to assume that most of you are dealing in that kind of SOHO to small business market. Again, you'll find, just to comment on that SOHO thing, you'll find that for the most part, it's not going to be financially, it's not going to make a lot of sense for companies that are in that very small size to purchase managed services, because you've got sort of, there's kind of an overhead of things that you have to do, regardless of whether they're one user or 100 users. And so you've got to kind of factor that into your pricing. A lot of companies have kind of a minimum size. They won't sell less than, say, if they're selling per user, they might not sell less than 4 or 5 users at the beginning. Anybody have any comments, questions about that?
I'll just say, Dave, that Soho is tough also because of the customer themselves. Their buying habits are very different, and they're used to buying on an ad hoc or as needed basis. And they're probably the toughest to try and convert to a managed services model, even if they think they need it. So,
yeah. Yeah, and it's expensive. It's hard to get them to bite on $500 or $600 a month to start. When they're, maybe not even spending that, in expenses across their company, depending on what they're doing. So Luis, what are some of the products that you started with, and kind of how did that evolve for you? Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. When I first jumped into consulting, I actually started offering, let me back out a little bit. I worked as a retail person at a local Apple reseller. And when I left there, I knew there was an opportunity to help with people that wanted setups at home and stuff like that, because nobody was addressing that market here. And so I left that reseller, but I turned around and offered them a setup and delivery service that they started to package with their sales. And so, for $150, they'd offer my service to come in for up to 2 hours and deliver the computer and do the basic setup and sort of walk away from it. Each one of those customers would eventually call back and need some more help. And this turned into a nice little business. But I quickly hit the ceiling of hours, which is really the challenge with break fix, as you know, is that there's a cap of amount of work you can do. And then some of those customers started to bring me into their businesses, and that's sort of where I saw the light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak, of the ability to move into a business realm and be able to charge sort of recurring revenue for services. My first recurring revenue contract ended up being a medical clinic that was referred to me by somebody I didn't even know. Somebody just knew of me, and they knew that this medical clinic was looking for a second opinion. And I came in, they really liked me, and they really disliked their previous vendor or provider, and they sight unseen offered me their managed services contract to take over. So I ended up having to sort of reverse engineer what I'd offer into this, roughly $1,500 a month contract at the time for about 15 people. To sort of build out a plan in reverse engineer it. And that's how I got started, actually. And I figured out, okay, well, unlimited support makes sense. And I started adding little bits and pieces to the agreement as we went along. But they primarily just wanted out with whoever they were, and they didn't care if I didn't have it figured out. They just seemed to like me, and that was good enough for that point. But once I sort of figured out a structure and built a contract around it, I was able to start offering that more and more to other customers. And it took a good 3-4 years, I'd say, of building enough of a bench of recurring revenue customers before I was able to start moving away from a lot of the break fix business. So definitely a process is all I can say about that.
Mm-hmm. Great. Okay. Anybody have any comments, thoughts about what Luis had to say? Conversation? You guys are a quiet group. If we were all together, I'd throw candy. That usually gets people to talk.
Yeah. I think I see a lot of people struggle or ask about the idea of like, how do I convert? How do I, present the value, articulate the value of converting to managed services? And what I have found is that the majority of people that have moved from break fix to managed services successfully have eventually just simply started looking for new customers that they could better compel into that model than trying to switch their old customers to it. And over time, they either let go of the old customers, or they kept a hybrid situation going for a number of years, supporting their legacy customers with break fix, because, hey, you've known these people for a long time. It's tough emotionally to just kick them out the door. And then also doing managed services for the new set of customers. But often trying to manage the two and be efficient with the two can be difficult, of course.
Yeah, and it's very, very, very common. I mean, it's a definite a challenge. We talked a little bit about it last week, about that challenge of trying to convert customers. It is a it is really a hard proposition in a lot of cases to do that. Okay, let's talk a little bit about fully managed versus a la carte and what that means, because that's the next decision that you really need to make. So fully managed is, we also kind of call it take it or leave it. So that's going to be kind of the whole breadth of management. So server, network, workstation, all of those managed options that you see. Again, I'm not going to kind of just walk through all that stuff. This is mostly just an example. But the advantage of a fully managed type of a program is it's easy to understand for straightforward. Here's what's included. Here's what's not included. It's easy to understand for your salespeople. It's easy to understand for your techs because they know what it is that they're doing for the clients. And it's really easier because of the simplicity. It's easier to make money selling a product like this. But there are some disadvantages. Primarily, it's more expensive. So to sell that fully managed product means you're going to be charging on average more to your clients. So that also means that it's harder to find clients that are going to fit that product. So you've got to kind of go through more opportunities that it doesn't fit to find the ones that it does fit in. And that's sometimes a challenge. If you're talking to, I always tell my clients, if you're talking to, say, 5 decent opportunities, only one of those 5 will likely fit a fully managed offering. So that means you're going to hear a lot of no's when you're selling only fully managed. A la carte bundled programs are things like that core security that we talked about earlier, core desktop, help desk management. So you're offering kind of that core piece, and then you're layering on some optional items on top of that. So it's easier to sell. So that's primarily the advantage. It's easier to sell because it's less expensive typically. You can tailor it more to what the client wants and so forth. But there are some really big disadvantages. One of the disadvantages, it's easier to sell. So if I'm offering a fully managed product and core security or core desktop, I typically, the salespeople are selling a lot more core security and core desktop because it's just cheaper and it's quicker and it's easier to sell. I see that all the time. When I see companies that offer kind of that multiple products, they have a ton of these lower cost products because they just fall back as soon as the client pushes back. They fall back to selling one of these items. It's a lot harder to make money selling these kinds of items because they're much more complicated. The margins aren't as high. The recurring revenue is not as high, and the support requirements are not as high, are much more difficult. So you've got a lot of situations that kind of have to be figured out by the techs. Are you supporting it or you're not supporting it? And so forth. The ratio, somebody asked on text or on chat, what was the ratio? I don't follow you on the ratio. And yes or no to fully managed. So I typically recommend fully managed because I think it's just easier from a company's perspective to operationalize. Like I said, it is typically more difficult to sell, but when you do sell it, you're making more money. And so it's in my opinion, it's better to have fewer, more profitable clients than a ton of clients that are only marginally profitable. And again, I don't know what what was the ratio question meant. Any other thoughts?
If there is, you say, how many clients say yes to fully manage against others? You say some ratio on the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, again, my recommendation is to pick one or the other. if you're selling both of these at the same time, which a lot of people do, you will sell a lot of a la carte and not much typically. Just because when clients are presented with these options, they're going to typically take this cheaper option, 9 times out of 10. And so you end up with a lot of clients, but profitability is much lower. If you sell fully managed and that's your go-to-market and that's what you sell, you're typically going to find that you have fewer clients and you're more profitable if you've set up the pricing and the backside of your operations properly. Does that make sense? So I don't think there is a magic ratio.
Okay, thank you.
My magic ratio this way. So Luis, what are your thoughts on all that?
Yeah, I would agree. I think we sort of made the conscientious decision at the MSP that we just had to not offer anything else. And I think one of the interesting things that is sort of evolved over the years is our ability to articulate or to pitch why the single offering makes more sense for both parties. Those things can often come off as one-sided in the beginning as you start to figure out what are the business outcomes and what are the business benefits, and you learn how to speak about those things to prospects and customers. But long term, I think we've really come to really place ourselves around the idea of ongoing evolution, ongoing improvement, continuous improvement rather, helping drive the customer's operational maturity and how their operational maturity helps our operational maturity and vice versa. I think all those things sort of put into a good story or presentation to help the customer understand why that's the preferred engagement model has made a little bit easier of task of selling the fully managed package. And I think it starts with the website. I think a lot of MSP websites get too detailed or too package menu type offerings. It's like, yeah, we offer all these things, but you see very few websites that are talking about the business outcomes and trying to raise that discussion or abstract it from sort of the little minutia of the details of the things that you offer. So I'd say that's my comment, to not get into too much more tangential detail, but it just sort of requires a holistic look at how are you talking about your services and how can you shift the focus onto a business outcome type of conversation.
Yeah, and outcome-based selling and selling around pain. And we'll talk about that next week more, but selling around pain in the business is really the best way to sell a fully managed plan. Is how does your offering fix the pain that the client's in? There's a really good question in the chat. Is there an expectation to get clients on a lower a la carte plan and eventually move them to managed services? So back in the late 2000s or so, there were, in the industry, you saw a lot of people talking and pushing the idea of freemium. So you're going to offer kind of a free package, and that's going to lead people to something that they're going to purchase, or just the same idea of, well, sell them something, get your foot in the door, and then that's going to lead you into a bigger opportunity. That, my experience, and I've seen this a lot. I've seen this over and over again in clients, and then also in my own MSP that I built. Cross-sell works. So if I have them in an IT product, and then I also sell, say, phones, or I also sell WAN connectivity, or even marketing sales and website and things, cross-sell works great. But moving people up is really, really difficult. Once people get into that kind of an a la carte situation, and you come in with this higher priced product, you really have to prove to them that they're going to save money that way. And typically, that's hard to do, because they're not getting all of the things that that you're probably offering in your fully managed, and you haven't. It's hard to prove to them that they need it all. Unless something major happens that isn't your fault and they don't blame you for, which is also really tricky. It's unlikely that they're going to move up in my experience. So comment here, my company's a little bit already established. We have about 650 managed computers. What I would suggest when starting managed client, have a clear goal, how you want to see their documentation. That is my company struggle. Yeah. And that really is just the bigger picture of, you've got to understand how to operationalize what you want to do from the beginning, because reinventing yourself from an operational standpoint as you go is very expensive, because you've got to go back and essentially re-onboard clients. And documentation is one of the big pieces of onboarding that's really critical, is getting that piece done. So, okay, moving on. Decision number 3. What should we include in our packages? So this is the specifics of what we want to build in there. So for reactive services, we're always going to include remote reactive services at some level. So depending on the product, we may only focus on workstations, or maybe only on servers, maybe only on network devices, but we're always going to offer that remote reactive services. On-site services are sometimes included. I said potentially, usually. I would say it's at least 50% are offering some sort of on-site services as part of their managed services. I think it's becoming more prevalent than it used to be. Personally, I think it's an important piece if you do it right. But that's something to think about. Another thing to think about, unlimited does not mean limitless. And I can't tell you how many times I've helped MSPs with this concept. So when we create an unlimited plan, it's an unlimited plan with specific boundaries or edges. For example, we are not going to include in our unlimited plan upgrading from Windows 2016 server to 2019 server. That's not going to be included. We're not going to include upgrading from Windows 7 to Windows 10, although that's a whole conversation I think we'll have here in a couple of slides. You're not going to hopefully provide unlimited online services. That is something that, if you don't set those limits or those boundaries or edges, it can really eat you up. And you really have to be aware of how that works. As far as on-site, one of the things to think about is I recommend scheduled on-site services. So you can, or I should say scheduled non-emergency on-site services. So for example, you can say to the client, well, we're going to be on site depending on your need, twice a month. And it's going to depend. You tell the client depending on their need, but it also depends on the size. So a larger opportunity may take somebody on site, every week, maybe twice a week. Smaller clients, maybe once a month. So based on that size, you're going to just set an expectation that you'll be on site, not how often, for how long, all of those things. And you're going to schedule that, and you're going to have your tech come in on that schedule. And you'll find that, in my opinion, helps with a lot of the issues that sometimes we run into. The only time we go on demand on site in my kind of recommended model is in an emergency. If a server's down, the network's down, those are things that you can't fix remotely very easily. If we're going to offer on-site services, we need to include those emergency on-site services. And by the way, it helps you. It's more efficient in most cases to just go on site unless you're a long way away from your client. It's just more efficient to provide the services that way.
We speak to that quite a bit, Dave. In the beginning, we talk about how we offer unlimited on-site support as determined by us. So we don't give the client the ability to control when we go on site, but we will do on-site as required. By the way, anybody dropping questions into the chat, that's not the ideal place for questions. We'd like you to unmute and just have a chat with us here so that we don't miss any of your questions. So please definitely just engage in the conversation. It's easier for us to have this answer any of your questions that way.
Yeah, and along that line, one of the chat comments is that his opinion is on-site's important. They have a set schedule, set calendar, and each client gets visited every 2 weeks where they go through all the computers, do a visual inspection. Sometimes client can say anything, but when we visit them, we notice the hard drive is loud or keyboard needs a change or so forth. Yeah, and that's the idea behind a scheduled call. The other thing that happens too is if a particular needy user really likes to work with somebody, they'll tend to put off the question or the help desk issue until somebody's on site. And a lot of times it's just quicker and easier to handle that type of a user. So. We talked a lot about hard costs. So these are going to be the items other than compensation. So other than employees that we have included or bundled into our product offering. So these are some of the common ones. I kind of, this list kind of goes from most common at the top to less common. Again, these are all these on this screen are all very common bundled costs. So antivirus or EDR, email services, spam filtering, backup, Office 365, email or apps, some sort of cloud file storage product. A lot of times domain name is included, and a lot of times some sort of an email encryption product is included. One of the things to remember as you kind of build your product, the more you bundle, the harder it is for the client to go out and go to your competitor and say, hey, can you give me a price for this? Because you've bundled so many things in there. It's difficult to kind of, for the other competitor to sort of unravel everything. It's more difficult for the client, stickier. The client tends to not want to kind of mess with so much, their email and potentially their website, their domain name. There's just a lot there. And so it makes for a much stickier relationship and a much more difficult to shop around situation when you bundle. So I definitely recommend bundling, a lot of items, especially when you can do so inexpensively and that it fits your own kind of offering. Some of the less common things that we see bundled: voice over IP services, email archiving, SSL certificates, firewall as a hardware as a service. So that's the idea that you're going to come in, you're going to always put in your own firewall, and then you're going to make it a monthly fee. So you're buying the firewall, you're putting it into the client, and then your fee is a firewall. There are some companies doing that, and by the way, the ones that do it are very successful at that. That works really well. Dark web monitoring is a big one lately, and also phish testing is a big one lately that is starting to get bundled into managed services offerings. There's way too much here to read. I kind of put this up here so that you can look at it when you look at the recording, but this is just kind of an idea of elements that we go to market with. So, I guess what I'm really trying to illustrate here is there's a lot to these managed services. There's a lot of back end things that we're doing, that we're monitoring, that we're automating, and that's kind of happening behind the scenes. And a lot of times when we talked about, people moving from a la carte up to fully managed, this is the stuff a lot of times that is not getting done in an a la carte situation. And the client, if you're not technical, you may not even understand why any of this is important. And so that's why it becomes really difficult to kind of move people up market with this stuff. Workstation managed services. This is kind of an example of things that are bundled into here. This is interesting because all of these items can be automated on this particular screen. So remember that our biggest driver of cost in a managed service provider is staff. So whenever we can automate things, whenever we can do things in the background, we're saving on staff. And we're increasing the number of endpoints that we can manage per technician. So that's really critical when you're looking at what you're offering. How can it be automated? How much time does it take to do X that I'm offering? If I'm going to bundle something in, is it a very time-consuming effort from a labor perspective, or is it something I can turn on, get it running, and it just works? So these are really important questions and thoughts that you need to have as you figure out what to put into your packages. Network devices. This one you can see can be 65% automated. So here's one that has more labor that is needed to kind of accomplish this. So let's talk about things not to include. So I touched on this a little bit ago, but let's kind of get into this a little bit more in more depth. So server upgrades. And these are all the ones that I see all the time. So I'll engage with MSPs and I start looking at their contracts. And this is kind of my list of huge no-nos that I've seen, almost put companies out of business offering. So server upgrades is huge. If you're willing to, for $250 a month, go out and forklift out an entire Active Directory, put in new hardware, new Active Directory, upgrade, migrate all of those profiles because, for that $250 a month or whatever that you're charging to support the server, you can kind of see just doing the, napkin math there, it's never going to work. You're never going to make money. So you have to have those edges. You're supporting what is there. Okay. That's not to say that you are willing to necessarily live with the environment the way it is, but are supporting what's there. If there are upgrades, if there is a new version, that should be outside the scope of your managed services offering and should be billable. Workstations. So that's another one. That one's huge. And there's something out of order here in my animation, but workstation upgrades. This is a very common one too. A lot of people make the argument that you should do workstation upgrades because it makes it easier to support, and that is true. However, for example, I had a client last year that had workstation upgrades built into all of his old contracts. So we've since, his new contracts don't have that in there, but he spent 8 months last year doing almost no billable work whatsoever because he was only doing workstation upgrades for free for his managed services clients. So you can see that where you've got, normally you're charging for services and you have to put all of that on hold to do all of this free upgrade work on workstations. You can see that's a very, very difficult financial situation to put yourself in. I recommend that if you're going to do any of this, that you have some really aggressive limits. So you're saying, we'll do 10% a quarter, for example. That's a limit I've seen built into some contracts. So you'll upgrade for free 10% of those workstations. Another one I see is flat rate workstation upgrades. So if you buy a managed services product, you'll do the workstation upgrade for a flat $250 or something like that. All of those situations, make sure that you're not running around with techs stop trying to do things for free, which is exactly what you want to avoid. Yeah, somebody asked, what do I mean by workstation upgrades? Hardware and Windows version. So if you're going to replace the hardware and or upgrade the Windows version or, you know, Mac version, whatever, both of those things kind of constitute what I would consider out of scope or limited service under agreement. And then network upgrades as well. So switch replacements, wireless replacements, those kinds of things. All of that should also be out of scope. So you should be looking to generate. So if you're charging, say, $10,000 a year to a client, so that's $30,000 over a 3-month period, or over a 3-year period, excuse me. Over that same 3-year period, you should be able to produce about 1.5 times that yearly number in billable work. So if you're charging $10,000 a year over the course of 3 years, you should be able to charge, you should be getting about $15,000 in out of scope work flowing from that contract, kind of as just a rule of thumb. Does anybody have any comments, questions, thoughts about this? Because this is, you know, this is your really common mistakes here.
Yeah, I just, I guess a cautionary tale. A colleague that I knew in the Mac consulting space, based in Seattle, they sold a lot of agreements. They actually did really well in the sales component of their business because they were offering this sort of all-inclusive thing. We'll never charge you extra for any project. We'll never charge you extra for anything like this. And what ultimately happened is that they ended up having to create a queue system ultimately to be able to service a lot of the customer requests for these things. And so that immediately turned into a situation where they were no longer able to deploy projects on a timely basis for customers because they were always backlogged. And so it just became sort of a juggle exercise, you know, which customer can we disappoint the least by pushing them back with these projects. And so I feel strongly that charging for these types of things separately, A, creates the urgency necessary to get these projects finished quickly and successfully and on time. B, charging a fixed price for the customer helps everybody involved. It helps the customer budget for it. It helps the MSP focus on their efficiency and the ability to deliver that project very quickly and successfully without too many sort of arising issues after the fact. And C, it just makes sure that the customer is always focused on their own operational efficiency in the process too, because if you're just going to do this whenever, the customer loses fact of or loses visibility of the impact that some of these things can have. So,
yeah, a couple of comments in the chat. So in your agreement, you just list not included server, network, and workstation upgrades. And does that cause any confusion? So I usually recommend in the wording of the agreement that you define what an upgrade looks like and what an update looks like, and define updates around patches and point releases and those sorts of things. So, for example, you would typically include, the various Windows 10, even though they're major updates, you would include those as updates. But if they release Windows 20 tomorrow, that would be an upgrade. So a hardware change, a major version upgrade, those would be defined as out of scope, typically. It doesn't create confusion if you lay it out that way. Somebody else says network updates is good to do in my experience. You get all upsell, and also you can unify the whole network. For example, I guess what you're saying is you're finding 5-port.
Maybe Didsies can just unmute his mic and just chat with us for a sec about these comments.
Can you hear me, Dave?
Yeah.
This is Kevin down here in Kentucky. And my question is really to you as much as it is some of the other people listening. Are any of these packaging these contracts in the ways that you're encouraging us to? And I see the value in it. What I'm asking is any of this market sensitive as to packaging as well as pricing? What works in Kentucky may not work in Seattle, I guess is how I would phrase that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true to some extent, but what we're finding is that the numbers, the dollars that you charge are really pretty common across the board, and it's just a matter of how you position your product. So, for example, I've been helping SolarWinds. They've been doing a number of benchmarking surveys, and what we've been finding is there is clustering around pricing. So it may seem like you can't charge as much in rural Kentucky, but the reality is it's really a matter of having to look harder to find the clients that are willing to pay the money. I mean, they're there, but instead of being able to find them in a 30 square mile space, I know you guys kind of cover the whole northern Kentucky. That's what you've got to do in these rural neighborhoods. And I think you did mention that earlier, Didi's, that he's putting in the chat window because it's too loud to unmute.
And the comment I have about what Kevin was saying is, I think it's easy to sort of try and find the easy option and say, well, we only have success selling a workstation plan because it's cheaper and people here won't pay the higher price. And I've seen benchmarks from all sorts of industry experts, including folks like Paul Dipple or Gary Pica, that the actual market does not seem to matter. And to your point, Dave, you just need to look a little harder in some of the rural areas, but in almost all cases, the top performing MSPs can command those prices no matter where they are. And even in some of their more rural areas where they have a presence, they can still command their all you can eat type of packaging and pricing prices. So, yeah.
And to Didi's point about network updates being important, I mean, I recommend during the onboarding process that you're presenting to the client, hey, this is what we need to upgrade. And you're not just living with junk everywhere. You've got part of finding the right managed services client is finding clients that understand they've got to make investments in their infrastructure, and that's part of their thinking. That they're not willing to live with junk all over the floor, and that they understand that the reason they have a lot of downtime is because of those kinds of things.
But what about situations where, like, for example, in my country, most people don't really trust technologies and they're really old school. And so our problem is that we have to first basically teach them how to trust the technologies and that it makes their lives easier. Mm-hmm. And how would you go about that? Because we can't sell them full management because they don't really have even the infrastructure to sell them, but over time it can happen.
You're saying they have no IT infrastructure to begin with, or they just don't?
Not like none at all, but like some. But they like people here use mostly paper because it's even in the laws, like everything has to be papered, and people are having trouble to comprehend why they would have to use computers.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like the way it was here, 10, 15 years ago. And I had an MSP at that time, and we spent a lot of time educating clients on how they can save money. So we would go in and point out, if you do it this way, you're going to be able to, cut staff, or you're going to be able to cut overhead, or you're going to be able to do things faster, or whatever, however that looks. You're really selling them on why that's important. And I think that you've got to kind of maybe take a page out of what we were doing here 15 years ago and put it from that angle.
That's exactly what I'm asking, because like my father always used to say, like, we're 10 to 15 years behind America, so we're trying to get an idea how you did it back then.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we did. I mean, I can remember doing presentations where I had looked in depth at what they were doing and finding the inefficiencies and trying to quantify financially what those inefficiencies are doing to their business. So putting up a presentation of, you've got this piece of paper that spends 2 days flowing around your company. If we do it in an automated fashion, instead of 2 days of flowing this thing around, instead, you're going to be able to do this same piece of work in an hour. So now, we've sped up the time that it takes for X to happen by 2 days. And then trying to put dollars to those minutes and making a financial argument there. I mean, I would say that is what you want to be looking at doing, because that's exactly how we did it 15 years ago.
So the cost is the more important aspect than, for example, time. Yeah.
Well, time and cost are tied together, right? I mean, in most cases anyway.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, I mean, I think we spent a lot of time back then, trying to make a cost argument. And that's because they didn't have any IT infrastructure. If you've got IT infrastructure, it's a different argument altogether. It's difficult to make a cost argument if you have a company that's already got IT infrastructure and they're not convinced that spending more money on management is going to get them anything. It's just difficult to come up with a financial picture that works there. And instead, you've just got to talk about outcomes. But in your case, if they don't have or they have very limited IT infrastructures or none at all, I think it's truly just a financial argument of why they need to invest in IT first, and then why is it a good idea to have managed IT as opposed to just willy-nilly, putting things in.
Yeah, but won't that make the problem of we sell them IT and they go into that break and fix type of scenario, and then it's hard to move them to managed services?
And that's why I try to not do it that way. I would try to sell them the infrastructure and management all at once. Okay. Potentially bundle it together so that it's one price. And we did a lot of that too. Almost like a leasing agreement on the hardware.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. Somebody asked any advice on how to change all-you-can-eat packages over to something that excludes upgrades after the fact. Yeah, that's hard. You've really got to kind of build it into your new plans and then talk with your old clients. It's really difficult though to get them, because you sold it based on that's not included, and now all of a sudden you're trying to say or that is included, and now you're trying to say it isn't included. It's hard.
My advice is to swap it for something else of value over time. Something new you're going to include as part of your platform, whether it's, hey, we're going to start doing phishing simulation and security awareness training, and we're going to include this in your plan, but in order to control our costs, we need to remove this other thing. So you won't be able to just remove it unless you lower the price. And so my recommendation is swap it for something else.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, I mean, it might work to lower the price. You've got to look at it, and especially look at it depending on where you're at in the continuum of upgrades, right? I mean, we just blew through the big Windows 10 upgrade, so there may not, assuming your clients have upgraded, which I hope they have at this point, there may not be the looming disaster say for the next year. So you've got kind of runway there. So it might make sense to maybe lower the price in order to get that out of the contract.
Another option could be, as I was thinking about that, another option for that particular situation is to offer the customer the option to not get a price increase. And so this assumes that you're wanting to do a price increase, or that you obviously should be doing a price increase. And so one option is to forego the price increase 1 year in exchange for removing something from the contract.
Yep. Yep. And you could even position on COVID right now. This last one, we had already talked about the on-demand on-site.
So questions on the limits?
Yep.
So that's one thing that I've really struggled with was, what to include, what not to include. So I'm glad that you're addressing that. Another thing that I had included, I've been in business for 10 years and doing IT services strictly on an hourly basis. We have some customers that have a lot of turnover and some that have a little turnover. So I've included in my, additional services list that's not included in the all you can eat would be a certain cost for new hires and a certain cost for terminations. Does that make sense, or is that a bad idea for me?
Well, I would say that typically that's included. I mean, call those adds, moves, changes. Those are typically included in most all-you-can-eat type plans. Excluded in things like workstation support, those kinds of things, but included in all-you-can-eat plans. Those are typically pretty inexpensive to do. Now, if there's a hardware component, actually going on site and re-imaging and those kinds of things, I would exclude that piece of it. But generally, that's not required. That would be something specialized for a particular client. But I would include add, moves, changes. The other thing too about add, moves, changes is they're typically done by tier 1 employees. So your least expensive employees are able to do that work. So it's cheaper to do it. And I think that's a good thing to offer.
Hey, Mike, one suggestion I have perhaps is that if you are doing all-you-can-eat type agreements in these cases, you might put some language in your contract to limit it to a percentage of the total employee count of the included adds, move, changes. Because I know what you mean. There are some customers that sometimes the turnover seems a little oppressive, and you're doing a lot of adds or a lot of removals, and they do take up time. So in some cases, you might consider simply putting a percentage increase or percentage decrease to be included in the contract. Anything beyond that, you charge, half hours labor or something like that, just to put a little bit of a price tag on the extra work.
Yeah, safety net. Yep. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, we've even done that with managed services agreements in some cases in general. Because normally we are flexible in the up and down of contracts. Customer is 50 people. They could lay off half of their workforce and go down 25 people, but that would mean losing 50% of the agreement. So we've actually worked into our agreements that a customer can't lower their managed service agreement by more than 10% in any given year. And so it's not far-fetched to do that for things like adds, move, changes as well.
Another option is an onboarding fee for new users. So you don't charge to offboard. So you don't charge to remove the user, but adding a user would be considered an onboard, and you could have a fee for that.
Yeah, and adding a person typically takes more time than someone who's leaving. Although when they leave, we typically get an export of their mailbox and save their data somewhere, things like that. So there's some effort beyond just disabling the user account.
Sure. You just have to weigh, you don't want to seem like you're nickel and diming. That's when we sell all you can eat type plans, we want it to feel like there's a lot there, and we want to be able to explain away the out of scope where it makes sense to a business owner. And if you get into a lot of the little stuff and say, well, this isn't included and that's not, you start to come off like you're nickel and diming.
Right. Yeah, definitely want to avoid that. No, when it comes to upgrades, upgrading a server, upgrading network, would you typically do just an estimate and still bill by the hour? Or would you do those as kind of a fixed cost project?
Yeah, everybody's all over the board on that. To do fixed price projects, you have to be more sophisticated than kind of average, I think, in order to do that and make money. I think it's better to do fixed price where possible, but again, not if you're not good at estimating and not if you're not good at hitting your estimates, which I think a lot of people aren't. So
my comment on that question, Mike, is simply that you have to, at some point, ideally, be able to move your how you present value from an hour of work equals X dollars to a result equals X dollars. And it's really tough to do that when you're selling hourly based projects, because the customer will just continue getting pulled back down into this endless pit of like time equals money. And so I think, it took us a while, but we only do flat fee estimates now for projects. Only the senior consultants in the MSP deliver these projects. And so we know reliably that we can deliver within the quoted amount of money. I think it's tougher when you have a range of people deploying these and you don't know what the outcomes are going to be. But I would definitely venture to say that you'll be more successful and be able to be more incented to deliver quickly and efficiently when you're doing fixed price projects.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you.
You said it way more eloquently than I did, Luis.
And without comedy relief, go figure.
Okay, so on to good, better, best versus single package. So the good, better, best is really that idea of silver, gold, platinum packages. And my argument really is this is a discussion of sales and marketing versus operational efficiency, and really philosophical. What I typically see is companies that are built by owners that are sales oriented typically have a lot of these silver, gold, platinum packages. Companies that are built by technicians are typically more likely to have a single package because they recognize that silver, gold, platinum, good, better, best type packages just makes everything really complicated. But from a sales perspective, you're able to kind of sell towards gold, right? So you're able to say, well, here's my best package and here's my kind of cheap package. That from a sales perspective mentally pushes people to the middle. From an operational standpoint, it's super difficult. In fact, quick little story. One of my clients, they were a merger. They came together and they offered a silver, gold plat program. The other one only offered one, and they ended up ditching the silver package altogether and just giving away the full what became their gold package to everyone because it was so difficult just juggling the clients and what they got with silver and the clients and what they got with gold. And just from an operational standpoint, they found it was better to do it just one package. So, the other pros of having a good, better, best is that you've got a kind of a lesser expensive package or product to sell to somebody that's cheaper. But I would argue that, really you need to try and find the clients that are the best fit for what you sell. I think it's difficult to get the operational side of the house to kind of handle and deal with that situation. So, Luis, what do you think about, what to include in the packages, what not to include? I know we've talked a lot here along the way.
Yeah, I would say that tread cautiously, consider maybe even interviewing some of your customers that you have close relationships with. And, it's funny, I did this years ago. I brought a couple of customers that I had really good relationships with. I took them out for lunch and I said, hey, I want to just have a conversation about how you feel about certain things. And we're just trying to build a better sort of plan to offer our customers. And I tried to get some honest feedback. Obviously, chat with peers as well. A lot of people have opinions on how they're packaging stuff, but I think think your customers are the best thermometer, and somewhere in between you'll find a place that you're comfortable. The other thing is that if you're going to try and try a few different things out, maybe err on the side of caution and don't include things initially and try to add them later as a benefit that you can say, if the customer is not happy with price, you can sort of include some additional things down the line. But I think it's really hard to remove offerings or parts of your service packages after the fact. So definitely avoid being too generous if you're still experimenting with what to include, what not to include. But definitely asking customers, I think, is a great way to get some honest feedback and open up that conversation for opportunities. This is the kind of thing you could do as part of your regular technology reviews or QBRs to just happen to have an open conversation about, pricing and how's everybody feeling about the services and that kind of stuff. That transparency can go a long way. And maybe this is not the MO in different markets where sort of the move to managed services is lagging a little bit. It's more difficult to have these conversations because there's not an established process for the managed services review, if you will, but there's no reason why you can't do that anyways.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and we did talk about that idea of how do you pull things back. It's really difficult. So don't over promise. You're better off to be conservative in your initial packages. So pricing, we're gonna have to speed this up a little bit because we're running out of time. So really two models. There's per device and per user. Per device is typically easier perspective because well automated in all of the RMM tools that are out there. It's easily calculated and so forth. The problem that we're seeing, and the reason that I push hard to get people to go to per user, is it does not work well with the cloud. So as we move more and more and more to the cloud, it becomes very difficult to justify what you're doing on a per device model. And the reality is, we know that it takes almost as much to support things in the cloud as it does to support them on site. So while you don't have some of the hardware issues, you do have a lot of the support issues. So I push for per user. I also think that per user is easier for clients to understand. It's easier to audit from the client's perspective and so forth, but it is typically for a managed service provider more difficult to build. This is big, especially in certain markets. And unfortunately, a lot of people that I work with help to drive commoditization, which is something we really, really want. Here's just kind of an example pricing model. So kind of that average $250 server fee, $65 network fee. I'm going to talk about it in a second here. We're going to be giving you a spreadsheet that kind of help you calculate this. But here's the math of doing this on a monthly basis and then what it comes out on a per user basis. Typically, by the way, we want to see per user pricing between $100 and $125 a month. So this came out a little bit low when we did the math this way, but it's kind of an example for you. And some examples of the a la carte programs, so kind of how core security might work, and then that bundled price at the bottom. So that $11 to $26 per device for core security, $24 to $38 a device on core desktop, and help desk management is typically $25 to $53. Actually, I would say it goes a little bit higher than that these days. Here's just a screenshot of that spreadsheet. Now, we are going to be giving that spreadsheet to all of you. I think Eris at the end here is just going to mention it here. I don't want to do it till the end so that because I have some slides here that I got to get through. If that's
no
okay.
problem.
Okay, we'll keep this one short. Any that you've learned about pricing?
Yeah, I think the the thing I've learned about pricing is not pricing itself, but rather taking the time to understand how you're offering or pitching your services from an actual speaking the words point of view. I can't say enough about the power of properly articulating what it is you're offering to customers and making sure that you can position it as a business outcome and a business value, and have had the chance to literally say the words before you go stand in front of a customer to offer them your services, because the confidence that's going to come across when you do this pitch and your presentation in general are often going to be the difference between whether the customer believes that this is worth something or not. So I'd say that absolutely just working on the pitch and the presentation is a big part of being able to get the pricing as well. I think all of the other price-specific things have sort of been addressed in the other conversations we've had here.
Yeah, and I would say the big takeaway is don't, for price, you're not going, okay, well, my clients are selling it for 50. Sell outcomes. You need to paint a picture of what it is that your outcome looks like, the pitch, as Luis said, and you have to have a price for that. And you know, it's got to be competitive with your competitors, but it doesn't have to be cheaper, and it doesn't even have to be the same price. You simply have to have the understanding that you can of what that outcome looks like, be able to present that outcome, and then be able to locate clients that will buy into that outcome.
Yeah. And, you know, you were talking about commoditization, and I think this is what causes that, is the race to the bottom. Right. If all you're doing is offering the same set of things or same list of features or products that everybody else already offers, then it is going to always come down to the cheapest option. If you're instead leading with why your company is special, how your company relationship with that customer is going to be better, then you have a different sort of value-based approach to how you can deliver services, and changes the conversation from this sort of feature or product specific one to a outcomes based one.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, again, this last one, how should we sell our service? We could do 4 weeks just on this topic. So this is like the super cliff note version. So contracts and contract lengths. So longer is generally better for contracts. So you know, month-to-month contracts are generally not a good idea, especially when it comes to valuation of your company. The longer the contract, the better. You should include an option to increase the price. So, you know, if we put a 3-year contract in front of a client, that doesn't mean that we need to charge the same price every year. We can put an option in there to increase by 2 or 3% every year. And that's really important, because you do want that price to go up. You want to have the price go up a little bit, rather than having to come back to the client and increase it by 15 or 20% or even 10%. That's generally the trigger that causes them to go out and check your pricing. And so you want to try to avoid that by increasing the price slowly and regularly. New MSPs. So if you haven't done this, you do have to be a little bit careful about long contracts, because as we learned earlier, if you're building the wrong things, if you make a mistake in what you're offering, you could really jackpot yourself. So while it is better to generally have a longer contract, just be careful if you're just entering these waters.
I'll just comment, it's not crazy to also give the customer a contract with the understanding that some of these things might be adjusted as you're getting sort of more accustomed to working with them and customizing the plan to their needs. There's many ways to sort of spin the relationship or agreement to be something that is designed to evolve over time to fit that customer specifically. So don't be afraid to just have that conversation either, and just say, hey, what do you think about starting this way? And we'll sort of review in 3 months to see if that's the best way to approach this agreement. And most time customers will be fully receptive to that idea. So I think it's not crazy to consider that.
Yeah, for sure. I think you're absolutely right. And having that relationship with the client that's very connected, hopefully through sort of a VCIO type of a situation that we'll talk about next week, really helps to make those adjustments as necessary. Lead generation, you're going to find that referrals are the best way to grow, especially when you're smaller. The bigger you get, the less that may or may not work. But referrals, when you're small, is by far the best marketing and lead gen situation. Clients that are on pain are your easiest sales. So look for particular pain points. So I'll just throw out a few of them. The client that just lost their IT person, the owner who doesn't have an IT person and is growing, and maybe the owner themselves are their IT person. So they're the only person with any technical ability. So they're dragged into, desktop support and all of that. They just had a major problem with, say, a security breach, and they've got an internal person, and they have a security breach. So that generally leads to loss of confidence in their internal IT person. So those are the kind of things that we talk about when we look at clients in pain. Another one, quick growth. So if you find a company in your area that for whatever reason their business explodes, that's happening a lot in this COVID situation, where they're a company like, say, a cleaning company, they're exploding. Those kinds of situations, are clients that are in pain and that you can potentially fit a product into quickly. As far as closing, assessments to get to a price, and closing without assessments. So those are the two models. So you spend a whole bunch of time doing an assessment to figure out exactly what you're going to charge for your managed services is one scenario. The Gary Pica model, he was the one that kind of started and championed this, is you just go out, and if you find a client that appears to be a fit, you sell it without an assessment, and you agree to an out within a certain period of time. Meaning, if you find that things aren't the way you expected, or the cost to do upgrades is more than what the client is willing to bear, that you're willing after 90 days to tear up the contract and go your separate ways. I like that model, and I've done both. I started out on the assessments to get to a price. It's just a lot of work, a lot of upfront work, a lot of technical work, and then the client could say no, and you've basically lost all that money. And charging for those assessments, which some do, is hard as well. I view all of those things kind of as an impediment to sales. I like that second model of closing and then figuring out what needs done in the client and allowing both parties to tear up the contract within 90 days if it's not working. So common sales mistakes, and I'm just going to zip through these because I really want Eris to talk about that spreadsheet a little bit. Lacking a sales engine, so not having the ability to sell, customizing each sale. You're trying to roll your own every time you go out and sell. That's a huge no-no. Like, don't do that at all. And that's a very common situation sucked into. Making the offer too technical. So if you're a tech and you've built your company, you're going to fall into this talking about tech. Don't talk about tech. Talk about business outcomes. Okay, Eris, real quick. So we've got this spreadsheet, and Eris from SolarWinds he wants to talk about that for a few minutes.
Hey, Dave. Yeah, thanks. Just to help the customers take a cost-up approach to pricing these things. And I know you were talking about the pricing model earlier and discussing the advantages of per user pricing over per device pricing, and I definitely agree with that. At the same time, when it comes to actually taking a cost-up approach to pricing things, we kind of have to look at the devices going on. So I'm going to share my screen. Am I allowed to just steal that from you? Or?
Yeah, go ahead. I think so. If you can,
let's see here. Giving that a go. Oops.
There we go.
Okay, you guys see my screen cleanly?
Yep.
Perfect. Okay. So look, there's a few tabs here for you guys. There's an instruction tab if you need to figure out which cells you can edit and which cells you can't and so on. By all means, take a look at that. In general, if they're gray, they're editable cells, right? So you can change the different tools, the names of your product offerings, whether it be a la carte, proactive, managed, whatever geo you happen to be in, whatever level of MSP you happen to be at from a maturity perspective, it's all available here. You simply take a cost up approach to pricing them by adding, first and foremost, an average labor cost. And now we're looking at fully burdened cost here, meaning you take your tech salary, you divide it by whatever 2,080 work hours in the year minus holidays, depending on your location and what have you. And you come out with a per hour price, and then you add burden on top of that. You can go look that up online. There's lots of sites that discuss burden and what goes into that. But basically, the rule of thumb is if it's an expense towards your employee, if it's a cell phone allowance, if it's incentives, if it's vacation pay, pensions, et cetera, all of that has to be factored into the fully burdened cost of labor. And you're going to do that and average it out across your entire engineering team and put that number in here. You can get more detailed than that, obviously, but this is a pretty general rule of thumb. That seems to work okay for most people, at least starting out, and they get more and more detailed as they go. And then you're going to fill out these sections. Section 1 is the software cost. So what am I including from a software perspective in this package? So if I'm looking at my fully managed, which I think you guys were talking about the most today, what am I doing at the server level? What am I doing at the network device level? What am I doing at the workstation level? And how do those line items then relate to or rely on software that I'm going to leverage? For example, I'm going to be using my RMM or Incentral platform, and what's my cost going to be? Don't look at the prices in here, guys. I just put numbers in there to give an example. You're going to customize this for yours, but you're going to put in the cost of your agent. You're going to put in whether you're using an AV license or an EDR license and what that's going to cost, or if you're doing risk intelligence or backup or mobile device management or email and web protection or anything else that isn't even listed here. You have all of these columns to work with and customize to add whatever it is that's included there. Once you've gotten that, the tool will automatically calculate your software costs for that line item. And then you're going to put in your HR time. And this is going to calculate based on that fully burdened cost. So if I'm budgeting, say, 15 minutes a month to do a test restore on that server, and I'm doing that manually, and I'm not talking full recovery here when I say test restore, but if I'm doing that and it's taking me this amount of time, I'm going to want to add that to my line item. And then if there's any other costs, whether it be hard costs or I don't know, maybe for that server, for example, we need to buy a NAS for the customer, and we're going to include that in our price. I mean, some people do, some people charge it up front. Whatever the difference is, you have the option of adding it in. That's what this line is for. And then you simply pick a price. Now, we've got a lot of average pricing, geo-specifically in the Institute that you guys can go pull the document. It's a program doc with geo-specific pricing attached to it. You can take a look at those. Those are average prices we see. A couple of things need to be updated, like EDR, which is brand new, and we're still getting the metrics now. We have them. I will be updating it. But then you will have what your margin looks like for each line item. And then what you'll be able to do once you've taken a cost up approach and not doing the mistakes that Wilkie was talking to you about before, which is pricing based on competition or pricing based on, what you believe the customer can afford, right? Those are two of the big no-nos. Taking a cost up approach and making your programs standardized and scalable the way that they've talked about means you're going to be able to repeat it over and over again, and every time they go and buy that Big Mac, it's going to taste the same and you'll be successful. And this is the best way to do it from a pricing perspective, is to take that cost up approach, right? And so then once you've done that line item by line item, all you have to do is figure out what is it that customer's buying. So if the customer, and I pre-populated this one, is a 2 server, 2 network device, and 20 workstation network that's going to buy fixed fee from me, and whatever we had in the example there calculates out to $1,930 a month, divided by your 20 users to come up with your per user price is how you get to that number. You'll be able to see what your overall program margin is, how much time you've budgeted to spend on that account. So you should be measuring against that ongoing to make sure that you're not spending too much time or more than you've accounted for on a customer by customer level. And if so, you can dig into why. Are your engineers taking longer than they should to do their stuff? Are they more problematic than they should be? Should I be including other services like Luis was mentioning, adding on as you go, right? Those are the types of things you can only understand and realize if you've taken this cost up approach to pricing your programs. Okay, so that's what the tool is for. There's a quote here, but it's an example. I wouldn't use this from a quoting perspective. There's other tools out there that you could use, or you've got your own accounting software. But the long and the short of it is, taking a cost up approach is the best way to identify really what you're spending and what you're making, right? And remember that these margins here are typically just program margins. You're not including in the cost of these overhead costs and other costs in the business, typically speaking. Those costs have to come out of your margins. So being able to see these margins and thinking about, how much do I need to keep the lights on and pay the rent and so on, and how much of it's going to come out of here and what am I going to look like from a profitability perspective is the best way to move up that notch and start becoming a higher profile, better, a more profitable MSP. So that's really the quick down and dirty Coles Notes version of this. We have some pricing courses in the Institute too that they can go to, and everything you guys said, of course, is right aligned. So if there's any questions about it, I'd be willing to take it now. Otherwise, Dave, that's pretty much the high level overview of the tool that we're giving out.
Awesome. Thanks, Aris. We can hold this open for questions, but I know we're at the very end and we're actually over by a few minutes. So just real quick, next week, we're going to go over staffing, teams, sharing staff, the criticality of processes, onboarding, and tool sets. And we will likely have another guest with us as well. So with that, you're absolutely welcome to go on with your day. I appreciate you joining us today. If you do want to stick around, if you have any particular questions, I can stick around, Aris can stick around. I don't know if Louise has something, but I'm happy to stick around. But otherwise, thanks for your time today.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Dave, for a great presentation.